Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Todd O'Hare with the Montana Chamber of Commerce. We'll do a quick recap of last week and a little bit of what we're working on this week. As we start here, I will note that we're recording this in case people want to watch it later that weren't able to join us at lunch. We will stop the recording when we get finished with our report, then we'll open it up to Q&A, and so you can ask questions when we're finished on any subject that we covered or didn't cover, and you can do it without being concerned about being recorded. So I'll just start off. Last week, things are starting to roll. It seemed like we were a little bit slow in getting going, but I think things are starting to roll and starting to see some meatier subjects that are starting to come to the top of the list here, and I'll just touch on a couple here. Last week was Medicaid.
Last week was MIPA.
Last week was MIPA.
Yeah.
Week before was Medicaid.
Yep, it's blurred together already.
It is blurring together. So yeah, last week was MIPA. We had a little bit of MIPA. This week, for those of you that are in the natural resource world, MIPA is the Montana Environmental Policy Act. It is the primary framework that is used to analyze environmental impacts associated with any sort of a state permit. A lot of uncertainty has been thrown into the MIPA process, if you will, that resulted from the Held versus the State of Montana Supreme Court decision. And so we are heavily engaged in those sort of bills as we look to try to put frameworks around that process. That is a process that both analyzes impacts appropriately, but also gives a clear pathway for those that are seeking state permits, so they know it's like, this is the sort of steps we've got to follow in order to go down that permitting process. What else did we have last week that is worth bringing up here?
Don't even know.
Kind of related to me, but technically a different statute is the some HB 291, which revises the Air Quality Act, and essentially says that state and local standards won't exceed federal. And I think the occasional practice, especially in previous governors of DEQ, looking at potentially setting higher standards, different standards than the federal standard, or local government setting different standards, creating a patchwork, making compliance more difficult. So this is Representative Greg Oblinder's bill to had hearing on Friday, and it looks like it's coasting to passing.
Great. So I think, part of our goal with some of this sort of activity is to not make Montana an outlier as it is concerned to permitting. We've already got, enough challenges with the permitting process in the state as it is. We don't want to create additional sort of hurdles, and as long as we're kind of in sync with what's going on the federal level, that's sufficient. Sheridan, anything on childcare last week, or we can jump into this week if you wanted to jump into childcare this week?
Perhaps. Before we jump in, last week was a lot of working behind the scenes with our property tax bill. We heard it a couple weeks prior, but I think we're working well to get it so that the corporate tax rate won't be increased for, I don't remember the exact number limit, but.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There was the Homestead-Comstead bill that was proposed by Representative Lou Jones, and essentially created some different classifications within commercial taxpayers and home property taxpayers. And essentially what that bill did was, on the commercial side of things, the business side of things, is that if your business was valued, its property was valued at $2 million or below, you got a tax break on your property taxes. If it was $2 million or higher, you were put into a higher property tax rate. And we oppose that. Frankly, I don't like a policy that forces larger businesses to pay more just because they're larger businesses. And I think once you go down that road, as far as a policy is concerned, becomes a lot easier for future legislatures to like go ahead and continue to ratchet that up. And the constituency for larger sort of businesses in Montana becomes smaller and smaller. And as far as we're concerned is, you know, we want to see all business growth in Montana, small business and large business. And so we oppose that, recognizing that some of the smaller property taxpayers that are smaller businesses would get a bit of get a property tax break, but it would come at the expense of some of our larger sort of businesses in Montana. And that worked. Representative Lou Jones amended that bill to take that property tax rate for those larger payers back down to what the original level was, right? So that's not to say that commercial property taxpayers that are in that higher realm won't still pay more, because as property values continue to increase, right, they're likely to continue to pay more. The homeowner piece is still a work in process. Representative Jones is trying to create a process where lower valued homes maybe are exempted from more of the property tax. And so all of this boils down to, so forgive my quick soliloquy here, but all of this boils down to is the tax structure that we're operating under this state, which is an income tax and primarily a property tax state, is the only way to be able to provide property tax relief for any category of property taxpayers. Is you've got to raise it on another category of property taxpayers. And at some point, this state is going to have a much more serious conversation about what our tax structure is, rather than just shuffling the chairs around in the room. So we're doing our best on those sort of things to protect as many members as we possibly can, trying to avoid creating sort of negative tax policy. So I think for the time being, on the commercial side of things, I think we're in a place that we're relatively comfortable with as far as its impact on the business community. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, you bet. And to that point, most of the conversation we've had about property tax is really the grief we've heard is really focused on that residential thing, right?
Yeah.
Businesses are incorporating it into the cost of doing business. And sure, if you're in the most expensive part of downtown, you might feel it a little bit differently, but even still, it's not at the same rate that we're seeing, which does matter for our employees and the people that work for us across the state. But
So this property tax issue is going to be one that's going to suck a lot of energy out of the capital, because there's a lot of pressure to do something. And as far as we can see, there's no great fix. It's more of a temporary sort of a Band-Aid until we finally admit to ourselves as state and as state voters that we're going to have a different sort of conversation. We're going to continue to like look for Band-Aids. And I think our job is to make sure that like they don't grossly overcharge one entity of businesses over another.
Mhm.
So what else did we have last week? Is that it? Or do you want to jump into this week?
We got a little bit of movement on the TIF side of things, and Sheridan, you weighed in on, was it House Bill 19?
yeah, I think so. Just we're doing some good things on oversight and things on TIF there. Senate Bill 1 and 3 should be heard this week on the floor. They did make it out of committee, I think. I know 1 did at least.
Yeah.
And Senate Bill 2, with some of the newly taxable that folks were concerned about, is still in a holding pattern. We can touch base on that further if you have specific questions, but
Yeah, I think the good news on that too is that the Republican sponsor and the Democratic leader in that Senate committee are working to try to see if they can find something that is more workable to both sides of that. And so that's continuing to go on. And so that's good news there. So
yeah, I say jump into this week. What you got?
Yeah. Well, it's Tuesday, right? So, man, lots happened yesterday. Todd, you gave testimony on Senate Bill 221, Senator Galt's bill to revise the Environmental Policy Act and to set up a greenhouse gas framework. And it was a feisty hearing, but I think it was a very broad coalition in favor.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that hearing went as well as you could expect. Recognizing that we've got some parameters that we have to work around with the Supreme Court ruling. And I think our big effort here is like, how do we create a path forward? How do we create a path forward for those that have to seek a state permit, that will have to go through some sort of greenhouse gas analysis, so that they know what that process looks like at the front end, all the way through the process, and at the back end of this thing, they can be assured that they're going to get an answer, whether that's a yes or a no on their permit, rather than we're going to need a lot more studies. And that's the big thing that we're trying to get to. It's like let's give businesses a yes or no at the end of these processes, and then deal with their, like, this dragging on for years and years, studies and endless studies is not helpful for anyone. So
As far as other things, we're moving right along in our priorities on torts. Legal reform there, heard some of those this morning, and childcare, the bills we're supporting are on, it's still in drafting. We're working out some of the details with our national level partners on our childcare bills. There's a couple more out there that we are aware of, and we're happy to talk about those if you have questions. And then on the Medicaid front, it made it out of House Bill, is that 245? I can't remember, all the numbers blurred together now, but Representative Buttrey's bill made it out of the House committee and is expected to be heard on the floor this Friday.
yeah, and I think those, between property tax issues and Medicaid expansion, that's going to suck up a lot of the attention, and probably have the highest tendency to create frayed nerves amongst legislators, those two issues alone. So we're heavily engaged in both.